They said a widow shouldn't smile in Dust River, not when the snow still buried her husband's grave, not when the town had already written her story for her. But on one bitter winter evening in 1885, a stranger rode into her silence, a man with no past worth telling, and eyes that had seen too much of the world's cruelty. He didn't offer pity. He offered something far rarer. "Ride with me," he whispered. "I'll fill your table tonight." What happens when kindness defies gossip, when mercy walks in wearing a dusty hat and a quiet heart? Can one small act of decency change the course of two broken lives? Or will the judgment of a small town crush it before spring ever comes? This is the story of Clara Henson, a woman fighting for dignity, and Wyatt Cole, a drifter who thought he'd forgotten how to stay. Together, they'll learn that sometimes redemption doesn't come with thunder. It comes with warmth, wood smoke, and the sound of laughter returning to a lonely home. If stories of the forgotten West still stir your heart, like, share, and subscribe to Wild West Echoes. Now, saddle up, and let's ride into the storm. The wind that night came hard off the mountains, cutting through Dust River like a knife through canvas. It rattled loose shutters, swept thin snow across the boardwalk, and sang in the gaps between every plank and window pane. December 1885, and the world had gone to iron and ice. Inside Miller's Mercantile, a lamp flickered behind frosted glass. Shelves sagged under sacks of flour and beans, things ordinary as breath and just as far out of reach. Clara Henson stood on the threshold, one hand clutching an empty flour sack, the other tightening a faded shawl around her shoulders. Her cheeks burned from the cold and from the shame of standing there again, asking. The storekeeper's voice carried, sharp and flat, "No more credit. Mrs. Henson, you already owe near $8. No charity credit for widows living off sympathy." The sentence hit harder than the wind. Behind her, a door creaked somewhere, and she felt eyes on her back, neighbors pretending not to look, pretending they didn't hear. Clara tried to speak, her breath ghosting white. "Mr. Miller, I'll settle it. Come spring. I've got sewing work, promised, once the thaw, just a small sack to get us through." He cut her off with a shrug. "Spring's a long way off. Ma'am, can't feed a family on promises." The bell above the door jingled as he stepped back inside and let the door swing shut. The latch clicked like a judge's gavel. For a heartbeat, she stood motionless, listening to the wind whistle through the seams of the world. Then she turned, boots crunching on snow, pride the only warmth she had left. Dust River was little more than a row of shacks and tired men. Still, every shadow felt like someone watching. Hunger tugged at her stomach. But humiliation burned hotter. Down the street, lantern light spilled from the Henderson saloon, yellow and wavering. Laughter floated out, coarse and careless. Clara kept her eyes on the ground, the empty flour sack dangling at her side like a flag of surrender. "Ma'am." The word came soft, steady, half lost in the wind. She stopped, turned. A man stood near the hitching post outside the saloon, one boot hooked on the rail, coat collar turned high, snow dusted his hat brim and shoulders. His horse, a lean chestnut, shifted, stamping once. The man raised his head. Under the shadow of the brim, she caught a glimpse of pale blue eyes, calm, measuring. He lifted something from the snow. "You dropped this." Her shawl had torn on a nail near the Mercantile. A strip of fabric fluttered from his glove. She took it, voice barely more than a whisper. "Thank you." He nodded but didn't move away. "Cold night to be walking," he said. "I've walked colder," she answered, though her voice trembled. He studied her face a moment. "You got someone waitin' at home, my boy," she said. "8 years old. You get what you needed from the store." She almost laughed, but it came out like a breath broken in two. They don't trade in mercy these days. The corner of his mouth twitched, half smile, half sadness. He looked toward the mercantile, then back at her. Guess some men forget what hunger feels like. A silence stretched between them, filled only by wind and the groan of the saloon sign. Then he spoke again, quieter. "Ride with me. I'll fill your table tonight." She blinked. "What?" He stepped closer, careful, not to frighten. "Got a wagon down by the livery. Supplies enough for 2 households. You and your boy shouldn't be hungry tonight. Come with me." She tightened the shawl around her shoulders. "I don't know you." "No, ma'am. Name's Wyatt Cole." He tipped his hat slightly. "Just passing through." "I can't pay you. Didn't ask you to." Then Wyatt's eyes softened. Voice barely more than the wind, "Because I've watched a child go to bed hungry, and I don't ever aim to watch it again." For a long moment she couldn't breathe. The cold, the shame, the exhaustion, all of it swirled together until she felt hollow. Her husband, Tom Henson, gone 5 winters now. The promises folks made after the funeral long since faded. Only Noah's thin laughter remained to remind her why she kept standing. She looked toward the road, leading home 3 miles through open snow, her boots already soaked. Pride whispered no, hunger whispered yes. At last she said quietly, "All right." Wyatt untied his horse, offered his gloved hand. "You ride not since my husband passed. Then you'll remember." His hand was rough, warm. He lifted her into the saddle as if she weighed nothing. The horse snorted, impatient. Wyatt mounted behind, took the reins, and the two of them turned from the lights of Dust River. The town fell away, quick only the creak of leather and the steady crunch of hooves breaking snow. Overhead, the sky stretched endless and gray, a smear of moonlight caught in drifting clouds. Clara kept her eyes on the road ahead, but her thoughts tangled behind her. Who was this man? Why kindness now, when kindness had vanished from every other face she knew? The rhythm of the horse lulled her questions, yet they wouldn't rest. After a while, Wyatt spoke, his voice low beside her ear. "You don't have to talk, if you don't want to. Cold's enough. Work for the lungs." She found herself almost smiling. "You're a quiet man, Mr. Cole. Learned it keeps me out of trouble." A long pause. Snow sifted down soft as ash. "Trouble find you often?" she asked. "Used to?" Nothing more. He didn't owe her his story any more than she owed him hers. Still, something in his tone, like a door half open to a dark room, made her wonder. They crossed the frozen creek, where cottonwoods bent under ice. In the distance, a lantern flickered, maybe the trading post. Clara's hands had gone numb, yet some warmth stirred deep inside, fragile as fire under wet wood. When she spoke again, it was barely audible. "You don't even know me." Wyatt's reply came gentle, certain. "Don't have to. Sometimes you just see a person, and you know they've been hurt enough for one lifetime." The words lingered. She turned slightly. The brim of his hat hid most of his face, but not the quiet steadiness there. The kind a soul could lean against. As the wind eased and the first light from that distant lantern grew nearer, Clara felt something loosen in her chest. Something she hadn't dared in years. It wasn't trust yet, but it was close. And when the horse carried them over the last rise, Dust River vanished behind them, swallowed by snow and night. Snow drifted sideways across the trail, fine as ash from a dying fire. The wind carried no direction, only a long, low moan rolling down from the Bitterroot Range. Wyatt Cole kept the reins loose in his hands while Clara Henson rode behind him, her small frame pressed stiff with caution. For the first miles, neither spoke. Hoofbeats and wind filled the spaces where words might live. Behind them, Dust River's lamps faded into a smear of orange, swallowed by gray. Wyatt glanced over his shoulder once. "You warm enough?" Clara nodded, though the chill had already crept through her shoes. Pride made her answer steady. "I'm fine." He knew better. He'd seen that kind of courage before, thin, hungry, trying to pass for strength. Still, he let her keep it. They rode until the town's sounds were gone, and only the river's frozen murmur kept them company. Then Wyatt reined in, near a small stand of pines, and dismounted. "Stretch a bit," he said. "Horse needs rest." Clara slid down carefully, boots sinking in snow up to her ankles. Her breath rose like smoke in the dark. He untied a wool blanket from the saddle, shook off the frost, and handed it over. "Here. Better on your shoulders than on my horse." She took it slowly. The fabric smelled faintly of leather and wood smoke. "You don't have to be kind," she murmured. Wyatt shrugged. "Ain't kindness. Just sense. You freeze." "I got twice the work." The joke was small, but it cracked something open enough for her to smile. Barely. They stood in silence again. The wind tugged at the hem of her skirt. When she spoke, it came like confession. "I keep thinking I should have turned you down." "Why's that?" "'Cause takin' help feels like quittin'." Wyatt's eyes found hers through the dark. "Ain't the same thing. Quittin' is stoppin'. This is keepin' your boy alive." She looked away toward the hills, where the snow blended sky and earth into one endless sheet. The truth of his words stung worse than the cold. They rode on. Somewhere behind the clouds, the moon fought to break through, painting the land in faint silver. Clara's thoughts drifted backward to a face she hadn't let herself see in months. Tom Henson, in a blue union coat, coughing through the fever that never broke. The tent smelled of lye and sweat. She'd pressed a cool rag to his forehead, whispering hymns through tears. He'd looked at her, then the way Wyatt had steady, as if already halfway gone but still promising she'd make it. She blinked hard, brought herself back to the saddle. Wyatt's voice cut through the wind, soft but sure. "How old's your boy, 8? Smart with his hands? Says he'll be a carpenter when he grows." "Good trade," Wyatt said. "Honest work. My pa was a smith before the bank took his forge." She turned a little. "You've been ridin' long enough to forget countin' miles." There was a question behind her breath. "And where you headin'?" He gave a slow shake of his head. "Nowhere. Just away from where I've been." The honesty startled her. It wasn't rehearsed. It sounded lived in. They came to a fork in the trail where the creek curved south. Wyatt pointed his chin toward a faint glow ahead. "Trading posts a mile on. We'll stop there." The wind eased as they dropped into the hollow. A lantern burned in the window of a small log shack. Smoke curled from its chimney, the only sign of warmth for miles. Wyatt swung down first, tied the reins to a post, and offered his hand again. Inside, the air smelled of pine tar and tobacco. Mr. Latham, a thick-shouldered man with gray in his beard, looked up from behind the counter. "Evenin'. Cole," he said. "Storm's comin' harder tonight." Wyatt nodded. "Need flour, beans, coffee, salt pork. Enough for 2. Latham's gaze shifted to Clara. She lowered her eyes, feeling the familiar burn of judgment waiting behind curiosity. "Friend of yours?" the man asked. "Traveling company," Wyatt replied, voice calm but final. The trader studied them both for a heartbeat, then began scooping flour into a sack. Cash or trade, Wyatt untied a small bundle from his coat and laid out 2 beaver pelts and a handful of silver. Both. Latham smiled slightly. "You always pay straight. Wish the town folks did." While he packed the goods, Clara wandered near the stove, hands out toward the heat, her fingers stung as blood returned. The trader glanced over his shoulder. "Ma'am," he said kindly, "coffee's fresh." He poured her a tin cup before she could protest. The first sip nearly brought tears. Not for taste, but for the simple mercy of it. Wyatt loaded the supplies into the wagon outside, covering them with canvas. When he returned, Latham leaned across the counter. "Good men don't make noise about doing good," he said low, "but you keep moving fast before that town chews you up." Wyatt only nodded. "Appreciate it." They were back on the road before the lantern light faded behind them. Snow thickened again, soft and relentless. Clara wrapped the blanket tighter and watched the dark trees slide past. "You do this often?" she asked. "What's that helping strangers?" Wyatt took a breath that fogged in the air. Used to think help was something you earned. Turns out, sometimes you just give it so the world don't go completely cold. His words settled deep. Clara felt the pull of gratitude and fear fighting in her chest. Gratitude for his kindness, fear of owing someone again. She'd learned how debt could twist people, how pity could humiliate worse than hunger. She whispered, "You'll get nothing from me, but thanks." "Don't need more than that," he said. "Maybe just your word you'll eat tonight." She nodded. "You have it." By the time they reached the open flats, night had gone black. The horse's breath came heavy, clouds in the dark. Clara leaned forward slightly, feeling the warmth of Wyatt's coat against her back. It startled her, the comfort of another heartbeat so close. Inside, something unclenched. The fear didn't vanish, but it softened. The pride she'd worn like armor felt suddenly heavy, like metal she could finally set down. Wind brushed her cheek, gentle now, almost human in its sigh. Maybe, she thought, this was what mercy sounded like, not in prayers, not in promises, but in a man's quiet voice carried through the storm. The trail ran white and silent under the moon, stretching so far that sky and earth seemed stitched together by frost. Each hoofstep landed with a muffled thud, quick to vanish into the blanket of snow. Behind them, Dust River was only a smudge of lamplight lost among the drifts. Wyatt Cole rode easy in the saddle, body loose, motion steady as breathing. Clara Henson sat behind him, one hand gripping the edge of his coat, the other holding the blanket close around her. The night smelled of pine sap and cold iron. They didn't talk much. Words felt too sharp for air that thin. When Wyatt finally spoke, his voice came low, the kind made for calming horses and frightened hearts. "Trails narrow here, creeks iced over on the left. Keep your weight with mine." She nodded, though he couldn't see it. His calm steadied her more than she expected. The land began to open rolling plains, rimmed by black tree lines. The moon slipped from a cloud, lighting the snow like glass. Far ahead, a scatter of hills rose, and somewhere beyond those hills. The road forked toward the trading post. Clara let her eyes wander. Out here, the world looked untouched, as if no one had ever drawn a map for it. For a moment she felt smaller than she'd ever been, but safer too. Wyatt broke the quiet again. Townfolk give you trouble? Often. She hesitated. Most times they just look through me. Sometimes that's worse. He nodded. I know that kind of look. Folks decide who you are before you open your mouth. The wind lifted her hair across her cheek. And you, who do they say you are? He chuckled once. Depends who's talking. Some say I'm running from the law. Others say from a woman. Which is true? Neither, he said. And the smile faded. Just running from yesterday. She almost asked what yesterday had been, but something in his tone told her not to. Instead, she watched the sky turn pale where dawn pressed against the horizon. The first hint of color bled through the gray, thin as hope. By daylight, the world showed its scars, stumps where trees had been cut, fences half buried. The skeleton of an old wagon left to rust beside the trail. They stopped long enough for Wyatt to water the horse at a hole he broke through the ice. Clara climbed down, legs stiff, and stamped her feet for warmth. She wanted to thank him for every small mercy, the blanket. The quiet strength, but gratitude, felt like another debt. So she busied herself brushing snow from the saddle, pretending to help. Wyatt caught her doing it and smiled faintly. You don't owe me labor, ma'am. It's easier to work than to feel useless, she said. He looked away, toward the horizon. Reckon that's true for most of us. By noon, they reached the outpost, a low log building crouched beside a frozen river bend. Smoke rose from its chimney in a slow, straight line. A faded sign read, Latham and Sons Trading. No sons were in sight. Wyatt dismounted first, leading the horse under the awning. He gave Clara a hand down. Inside, warmth hit them, like breath from a forge. The smell of pine smoke and kerosene wrapped around the room. Behind a counter stacked with barrels and tins stood Mr. Latham, broad shoulders, gray beard, eyes the color of river rock. He wiped his hands on a rag and gave a curt nod. Thought that was you? Cole? Storm's coming faster than the papers say. Wyatt tipped his hat. Figured I'd stock up before it hits. Latham's gaze slid to Clara. Curious but not cruel. Company for the road. Wyatt's answer came plain. A friend in need of some things. The trader grunted, understanding more than he said. Got pelts to trade. Wyatt reached into the saddlebag, laid 3 beaver skins on the counter, thick, glossy. Perfect winter catch. Latham's brow lifted in respect. Fine work, he muttered. You always bring quality. He weighed the hides, then began measuring out flour, beans, coffee, salt pork, each sound the scoop against the barrel. The thud of sack on wood felt like a hymn to survival. Clara stood near the stove, palms open to the heat. Her fingers tingled, pain blooming as warmth returned. She glanced around the room, traps hanging from rafters, shelves lined with nails and candles, the ghost smell of tobacco leaf. It reminded her faintly of her husband's workshop before the sickness took him orderly, purposeful, alive. When she looked back, Wyatt was counting coins into Latham's palm. Silver clinked softly, no hesitation, no haggling. He paid fair and left a little extra. Latham tied the sacks tight and slid them across. Then, almost as an afterthought, he poured 2 cups of coffee from the pot near the stove and set them down. Drink before you freeze again. Clara hesitated. You sure? He gave her a small grin. Ma'am, I sell beans for a livin'. Can spare 2 cups. The coffee steamed dark and bitter. She wrapped her hands around the tin mug, feeling life creep back into her bones. Wyatt took a slow sip and exhaled through his nose. Satisfied. When the trading was done, He started gathering the supplies. Latham stopped him with a hand on the shoulder. Cole? Yeah. The older man's voice dropped low. Good men don't make noise about doing good. Wyatt's eyes met his. Ain't trying to be good. Just decent. Latham gave a knowing nod. That'll do. They stepped back outside into the pale afternoon. The air snapped colder. Clouds were rolling in thick from the west. Wyatt packed the wagon, careful and efficient. Clara helped, tying the tops of sacks with neat knots. When everything was ready, she turned to Latham, still standing in the doorway. Thank you, sir, she said softly. He waved it off. Don't thank me. Ma'am, thank the man riding with you. World's full of mouths. Few hands that feed. Her throat tightened. She wanted to speak, but couldn't. Only nodded once. Hard. Wyatt climbed into the wagon seat and offered his hand. She took it without thinking, feeling again that strange steadiness in him, the kind that didn't ask for anything back. As they rolled away, the outpost shrank behind them, a single square of light swallowed by snow. Clara looked sideways at Wyatt. His face gave nothing away, jaw set, eyes on the horizon, like a man who'd seen too much of both good and bad and still chose the middle path. The contrast struck her. The people in town with full pantries and full mouths had turned her away. This wanderer, who looked like he owned nothing, had given, without counting, the cost. The wagon creaked, wheels cutting tracks through the white plain. The wind had dropped now, replaced by that great western quiet that holds its own kind of reverence. Clara broke it first. Mr. Latham's right. Wyatt glanced at her. About what good men don't make noise. He gave a small smile, eyes still forward. Then maybe we'll let the silence do the talkin'. She smiled too, the first true one in months. The road stretched ahead, endless and pale, but for the first time, it didn't look empty. It looked like possibility. By the time they reached Willow Bend, dusk had folded itself over the land like a heavy quilt. The last stretch of road was hardly a road at all, just two ruts cutting through crusted snow, winding between cottonwoods, bowed under their own frost. The river ran a few paces to the left, frozen still except for a dark ribbon of moving water whispering beneath the ice. The cabin came into view slowly, as if embarrassed to be seen. Its roof sagged under a drift of snow. Smoke no longer rose from the chimney. One shutter hung crooked, the other was gone. A lantern glowed faintly through the front window, its light fighting the dark, the way a candle fights the wind. Wyatt slowed the horse, studying the place. Clara nodded. Her voice came small. Home. They stopped at the edge of the yard. The horse snorted, hooves sinking deep. Clara climbed down, her boots creaking in the snow. She hesitated, only a heartbeat, before calling out, Noah, it's Mama. The door creaked open. A small boy stood framed by the light thin, barefoot despite the cold, his hair sticking in soft curls. His eyes were wide, half wary, half hopeful. When he saw the shape of his mother, he bolted forward. Clara dropped to her knees and caught him mid-run, her arms closing around him. He was all bone and heartbeat, and she pressed her cheek to his hair and whispered his name like a prayer she'd almost forgotten. Wyatt stood a few steps back, hat in hand. The sight hit him somewhere deep, in that quiet place where memory keeps its ghosts. After a long moment, Clara drew back and brushed snow from her shawl. Noah, this is Mr. Cole. He helped me bring supplies. The boy looked up at Wyatt, sizing him the way children do, from boot to hat brim. He didn't speak, only gave a short nod that could have meant anything. Wyatt smiled gently. Evenin', Noah. The boy's voice came soft but sure. You're tall? Wyatt chuckled. Some days that's useful. Others just means I hit my head on door frames. That earned the faintest grin. They brought the supplies inside. The cabin was smaller than Wyatt expected. One main room, a cot in the corner, a rough-hewn table, and a stove that looked older than the country itself. Yet it was clean. Clara's touch was everywhere, in the mended curtains, in the jar of dried herbs on the shelf, in the neat stack of kindling beside the hearth. Wyatt set the sacks on the table, got flour, beans, coffee, salt pork, and a bit of lard. He pulled a skinned rabbit from his pack. Thought this might make supper. Noah's eyes widened. Rabbit stew, if your mama says so, Wyatt said. Clara blinked, caught off guard by how the word supper sounded warm, ordinary, like something she hadn't known in months. She nodded slowly. Rabbit stew, it is. They worked together. Wyatt chopped kindling outside, while Clara filled a pot with water from the bucket near the door. Noah fetched carrots and onions she'd been saving for Christmas. When Wyatt returned, he knelt by the stove, coaxing flame from the coals with practiced patience. The fire caught, snapping bright. Heat rolled through the room, chasing the chill into corners. The smell of browning meat soon filled the cabin, followed by vegetables and salt. Clara stirred, tasting with the back of a wooden spoon. Wyatt poured coffee, black and strong. Noah hovered close, asking questions in a small, eager voice. You shoot that rabbit yourself. Mr. trapped it yesterday. You always know where to find things, only if I'm lucky. Mama says luck's just hard work that don't get noticed. Wyatt smiled. Then your mama's a smart woman. Clara caught the words and looked down quickly, hiding her face behind a curtain of hair. Compliments had grown foreign. She didn't know what to do with them. When supper was ready, they sat together at the table. The stew steamed in 3 tin bowls. Noah bent his head, mumbling a shy grace. Then they ate slowly at first, as if afraid it might disappear. The only sounds were spoons scraping, fire popping, and the faint whistle of wind outside. Wyatt watched them both, the way Clara's shoulders eased, the way color returned to Noah's cheeks. Something about it settled him, like seeing order restored to a world gone crooked. After a while, Noah leaned back in his chair, sighing through a full belly. You cook good. Mr. Cole. Wyatt shook his head. Your mama did the hard part? She always does, the boy said proudly. Clara smiled, this time without hiding it. Later. Wyatt fixed the shutter with a few nails from his pack. Clara folded the empty flour sack and placed it neatly in a drawer, too good to throw away, too worn to hold much else. Noah drowsed by the fire, curled under a blanket. Outside, snow began again, soft flakes tumbling past the window, hushing the night. Clara watched Wyatt at work. His movements were quiet. Sure, like a man who'd built and mended things all his life. There was something peaceful in it. For the first time in years, the cabin didn't feel like a tomb of waiting. It felt lived in, the kind of place where tomorrow might still have meaning. When he finished, Wyatt stepped back, brushed dust from his hands. That'll hold till spring, he said. Thank you, she replied. He nodded toward the boy sleeping by the hearth. He's a good kid. He's had to grow up faster than he should, Clara said softly. Wyatt looked at her, and for a second their eyes met two people who'd seen too much loss and learned to carry it quietly. Neither looked away first. Then Noah's voice drifted up, thick with sleep. Mama, She crossed the room, tucking the blanket around him. "What is it, sweetheart?" The boy's eyes fluttered open just enough to find Wyatt's shadow by the fire. "Is he stayin'?" Mama Clara hesitated. The question held a kind of fragile hope she was afraid to break. Before she could answer, Wyatt spoke, voice gentle. "For a while, son, long enough to help." Noah nodded, satisfied, and drifted back into dreams. Wyatt stared into the flames, the orange light carving soft lines into his face. Outside, the storm thickened, but inside the little cabin, the air was warm, alive with the simple sound of 3 hearts still beating. Clara sat back down at the table, eyes half closed, listening to the wind fade beyond the walls. The day had begun with hunger and humiliation. It ended with a full belly and a stranger who spoke like kindness itself. Somewhere deep inside, beneath the ache of years, something small and fragile began to stir again, something like hope. The first light of dawn crept across the valley like a whisper, soft and silver, touching the frozen land with slow mercy. The night storm had passed, leaving a thin crust of snow glittering on every branch, every fence post, every roof, shingle that still held its place. From the small cabin at Willow Bend, a steady thunk. Pause. Thunk echoed through the quiet. It was the sound of Wyatt Cole's axe sinking into fresh logs. The rhythm was unhurried, sure, almost musical. Each swing sent a puff of frost into the air. Each breath clouded white against the morning chill. He worked bareheaded, coat hung on a nail, sleeves rolled to his elbows. The scars along his forearm caught the weak sunlight, silver lines of old stories no one had asked about yet. His shirt clung to his shoulders with sweat, steam rising from him like smoke off a forge. From the doorway, Clara Henson watched. She held her shawl tight, a cup of coffee warming her hands. The sight of him there solid, deliberate, brought a stillness she hadn't felt in years. The world outside might still be cruel, but in that yard, for those few moments, it wasn't. Noah's voice broke the silence. "He's been at it since the rooster crowed." "Mama." Clara smiled. "We don't even have a rooster, love." "Well, something crowed," the boy said, rubbing sleep from his eyes. "Can I help him?" She hesitated, then nodded. "Ask first." Noah pulled on his boots and ran out, breath puffing in little bursts. Wyatt looked up from his work, paused mid-swing. "Morning. Partner," he said, "can I split one?" Wyatt's smile reached his eyes. "Tell you what, hold this steady, and I'll show you where to aim next time." The boy did as told, proud to be trusted. Clara watched from the doorway, something like joy catching in her throat. The sound of wood splitting clean echoed down the valley. She went back inside, set another log on the fire, and poured a second cup of coffee. The cabin smelled of oak smoke, damp wool, and something that might be called comfort. She filled 2 tin mugs and stepped outside again. "Coffee's ready," she called. Wyatt leaned the axe against the stump, wiped his hands on his trousers, and took the mug. "Much obliged," he said. His voice carried the gravel of long trails and too many quiet mornings alone. They sat on the chopping block together, steam rising from their cups. Noah busied himself stacking kindling, humming tunelessly. A hawk circled far above, its cry sharp in the stillness. "He's a good boy," Wyatt said after a while. "He's all I've got," Clara answered. "Then you got something worth more than most." She smiled faintly, eyes on her son. "He looks up to you already. You swing that axe. He thinks you're cutting the world in half." Wyatt chuckled softly. Wouldn't take much with wood this soft. They sipped in silence, letting the morning breathe between them. You been out here long? He asked. Since Tom died, he built this place with his own hands. I couldn't leave it. Wyatt nodded, gaze drifting toward the cabin. Hard to walk away from something a good man built. And you, she asked gently, where's your home, Mr. Cole? He took his time answering. The words came low, heavy as the axe he'd been swinging. Used to be a cabin not much different from this one. Near the Cimarron, my wife, Ellen, and our girl, May. Clara's hands stilled around her cup. Used to be Wyatt's eyes stayed on the snow. Sickness took him. Fever ran through the valley fast one winter. I was out huntin' 2 days. Came back to find the fire cold. The wind shifted, carrying a faint whistle through the trees. He didn't look at her, and she didn't press him. Some griefs didn't need eyes on them to be understood. After a long silence, he said quietly, that's why I don't turn away. No one hungry. I learned too late what a full table's worth. Clara swallowed hard, the lump in her throat near choking. I'm sorry, she whispered. He shook his head. Don't be. World teaches you how to hold on. That's all. Noah came running up just then, face red from the cold. Mama, mister, Cole says, if we fix the lean-to, we can keep the wood dry. Wyatt grinned. Boy's got energy enough for 3 men. He gets that from his father, Clara said softly. Then his father raised him right. The rest of the morning passed in simple work. Wyatt mended the fence post that had leaned all winter. Noah handed him nails. Careful as a grown man. Clara swept the porch, patched a tear in the curtain, kept the fire steady. The cabin, once silent as a grave, began to sound like a place where life might stay. Near noon, Wyatt wiped sweat from his brow and leaned on the hammer. There, he said. Cabin's breathin' again. Clara looked around. The roof no longer sagged. The shutter held straight, and for the first time in months, she could look at her home without feeling defeated. You've done more in a morning than I could in a year, she said. Work keeps a man honest, he replied. Then, after a pause, and it keeps ghosts quiet. She studied him. You still carry yours, don't you? He nodded once. Everywhere I go. But they're lighter when I'm fixin' something. Maybe that's the trick. To heal by helpin', she asked. He half smiled, something like that. When the sun crept higher, they went inside. Clara ladled out stew from the pot she'd kept warm, poured him a fresh cup of coffee. Wyatt sat at the table, Noah beside him, talking about traps and tracks and what kind of wood burned longest. The man listened, really listened to every word the boy said. For Clara, the sight felt almost unreal. There'd been too many nights where silence had been her only company. Now there was conversation, laughter, the creak of chairs, the scrape of spoons. Life had sound again. She leaned against the counter, watching them, her heart tight with something between gratitude and fear. Gratitude for this moment, fear that moments like this never lasted. Wyatt caught her eye. You all right? Just thinkin', she said, about what she smiled, faint and wistful, that the morning light looks different when you're not alone. He looked down into his coffee, then back at her. Yeah, he said quietly. It surely does. Outside, the snow began to melt in small, clear rivulets down the eaves. The land was still frozen, but the thaw had started slow, almost invisible. Inside the cabin, it had started too. By mid-January, the snow on Dust River's streets had turned gray, packed down by wagon wheels and gossip. Smoke from every chimney drifted straight up, thin as thread, and carried the sound of talk that spread quicker then prairie fire and dry grass. It started at the church steps. Mrs. Keene, the pastor's wife, had seen Clara Henson walking beside a man tall, broad-shouldered, with a hat pulled low. By afternoon, she was leaning over the pew rail, whispering, "A man's been staying out there at her cabin. Says he chops her wood, fixes her fence. I say he's keeping her warm through the nights, too." The women listening gave small, sharp laughs, the kind that sound like coins clinking in a jar. By the time the sun dipped, the story had grown legs, a saddle, and a name: the widow's cowboy. At the saloon, the men took it further. "Heard she's paying him in company," one said. "Wouldn't blame him." Another answered, "Lonely widow, quiet nights, what else they got to do out there?" The laughter that followed was thick and mean, the kind that leaves an aftertaste of cheap whiskey and cowardice. Back at Willow Bend, Clara didn't yet know what was being said, but she could feel something shifting in the air. Neighbors who'd nod, once now kept their eyes low when she rode into town. It had taken her weeks to find courage to return to Miller's Mercantile. But supplies were running low again, and courage was a cheaper price than hunger. She hitched the wagon outside, brushed the snow from her shawl, and stepped inside. The bell above the door jingled. Every head turned, just long enough for her to feel it. The hush that followed wasn't silence, it was judgment, holding its breath. Mr. Miller looked up from his ledger. Well, Mrs. Henson returns. His tone was syrup on broken glass. "Just need coffee and flour," she said quietly. He smiled without warmth. "Cash this time." She placed a few coins on the counter, money she and Wyatt had earned selling firewood down by the river. Miller's fingers closed over the coins, slow, deliberate. "Guess that new helper of yours been keeping you stocked," he said. "Folks say you got a man livin' with you now. Seems you found a new way to settle debts." The room stilled. Even the stove seemed to hold its fire. Clara's throat tightened. She wanted to speak, to defend herself, but pride sealed her tongue. Her fingers trembled only once, then went still. Before she could answer, the door opened. The wind followed a man inside. Wyatt Cole stepped through the doorway, brushing snow from his hat brim. His eyes found her first, then moved to Miller. The space between them filled with something quiet and dangerous. "You talking about the lady?" Wyatt said. "You might want to lower your voice." Miller straightened. The false courage of an audience behind him, just making conversation. "Mr. Cole, this is a free town. Folks got the right to speak their mind." Wyatt's tone stayed calm. "Maybe so. But speaking your mind don't mean losing your manners." A few men at the back chuckled under their breath. Wyatt turned his head slightly, and the sound died. His eyes were pale and still like a frozen river that could crack without warning. "Now," he said evenly, "you got business with me. Say it straight. You got business with her. You mind your tongue." Miller's cheeks flushed red. "You don't scare me, drifter. I've seen your kind come and go, always ridin' in like saviors. Ridin' out when it gets hard." Wyatt stepped closer, slow enough for every boot tap to count. The men at the back shifted, chairs creaking. "You ever see me raise a hand?" Wyatt asked. "No," Miller muttered. "Then don't make me start." The air in the store thickened. Clara could feel her pulse in her throat, her palms, the hollow behind her ribs. She expected him to lash out to prove what everyone already whispered. Instead, Wyatt exhaled, long and quiet, and set his gloves on the counter. "We'll take what we came for," he said. "Paid honest. That'll be the end of it." He slid the flour and coffee across, gathered them up, and turned to Clara. Ready? Ma'am, she nodded, words locked somewhere behind her gratitude. They walked out together, the bell jangling behind them. Inside, nobody spoke. Only when the door shut did Miller let out a shaky laugh, more to fill the silence than because he found anything funny. Outside, the wind had risen again, carrying flakes that stung the face. Wyatt loaded the sacks into the wagon. Clara stood beside him, the sting of humiliation giving way to something else, a kind of awe. He'd done nothing reckless, nothing loud, just held the line with decency, and somehow that had shamed them all more than a fight ever could. She watched him tighten the ropes, his movements steady as always. "You didn't have to do that," she said. He looked up, eyes meeting hers. "Yeah, I did. They'll only talk more now." He gave a small shrug. Let him. Words don't cut wood or fill bellies. For a moment she wanted to cry, but the tears wouldn't come. Pride, again stubborn, familiar, but softer this time. "You kept your temper," she said quietly. "Learned it the hard way," he replied. "Used to think a man's worth was how loud he could swing. Turns out it's how much he can carry without breaking." They climbed into the wagon. The horse pulled forward, hooves crunching in the snow. Behind them, Dust River shrank into the same smallness it always had. "Thank you," she said after a while. "For what? For not giving them the fight they wanted?" Wyatt smiled faintly. "Fights are easy. Respect's the hard thing to win." She turned her face toward the wind, hiding the small curve of her mouth, for the first time since that door had slammed in her face weeks ago. She didn't feel ashamed of where she came from. She felt seen. That night, back at the cabin, Noah sat by the fire carving a small piece of wood, a horse, rough but taking shape. Wyatt mended a saddle strap, humming a tune under his breath. Clara ladled stew into bowls, the warmth filling the space between them. "You quiet tonight," Wyatt said. She looked at him across the flicker of flame. "Just thinkin'. 'Bout the town, about how some folks speak God's name with empty mouths." He nodded slowly. "World's always had more preachers than saints." Clara smiled at that, small but real. "And where do you fit in?" "Mr. Cole." He set the strap aside, eyes reflecting the firelight. "Somewhere in between. Closer to decent than to holy, I reckon." Noah looked up from his carving. "You're both," he said matter-of-factly. "'Cause good men don't need to tell folks they are." Wyatt met Clara's gaze across the table. She saw the quiet gratitude there, and maybe something deeper, something neither dared name yet. Outside, the wind moved through the trees, carrying the last of the day's talk away. Inside, the cabin held its warmth, its silence, and a fragile kind of peace, the kind that's earned, not granted. The thaw came slow to Willow Bend, the kind that crept in shyly, testing the ground before it stayed. Snow still clung to the shaded side of the hills. But the creek had begun to murmur again under its glassy crust. Every morning, a little more water ran free. Wyatt Cole rose early. Same as always. By first light, the yard already echoed with the clean rhythm of a hammer or the rasp of a saw. He'd pulled off the worst of the cabin's shingles, laid new ones from boards scavenged off an abandoned barn upriver. When the wind blew now, it hummed soft through the eaves instead of moaning like an old wound. Inside, Clara Henson worked quietly at her sewing table. She could hear him moving on the roof, boots shifting, wood creaking, nails tapping. In that steady 3 count he always used, the sound no longer startled her. It soothed, the way a heart steadies after a long fright. At the hearth, Noah sat cross-legged, tongue pressed to his lip in concentration. A small knife flashed in his hand as he shaped a piece of pine into something almost like a bird. Not bad, Wyatt said from the doorway. Coming in for coffee. The boy's head jerked up. You think Wyatt crouched beside him, turning the carving in his calloused fingers. Good eye for balance. Needs patience, though. Don't rush the grain. You got to listen to what the wood wants to be. You can listen to wood, Noah asked, doubtful, but curious. Wyatt grinned. Only if you're quiet enough. From across the room. Clara smiled. She didn't think the boy had been quiet a minute in his life, but she liked seeing him try. Through March, the cabin transformed. Wyatt fixed the door frame, patched the cracks where winter wind had slipped through, built shelves for the jars Clara kept lined like small treasures. Beans, salt, a bit of sugar when she could spare it, every nail driven, every board straightened, seemed to stitch the place tighter around them. The walls, once thin and weary, began to hold more than heat. They held laughter now, and voices that no longer sounded afraid of echoing. Clara found herself humming while she worked, old tunes she hadn't thought of in years. Sometimes Wyatt joined in, low under his breath, the baritone hum of a man who'd once known music but lost the habit of singing. When she caught herself smiling for no reason at all, she pretended to be busy with something else. But Wyatt noticed. He always did. World don't look quite so hard when a person's smilin', he said one afternoon, planing a plank smooth. She blushed, half amused. You fixin' roofs or givin' sermons, Mr. Cole? Maybe both. Roofs leak less, though. The days found their rhythm work. Meals, quiet evenings by the fire. The three of them fit together without trying. Wyatt took Noah on short walks through the woods, teaching him to read the ground where deer had passed, how snow bent under different kinds of prints. Every track tells a story, he'd say. Even broken twigs got a reason for snappin'. Noah repeated those words proudly to his mother later, as if they were scripture. Clara listened and nodded, watching something bloom in her son that no sermon or lesson book had ever given him respect for small, patient work. She watched Wyatt too, though she tried not to. The way he moved, efficient but never hurried, spoke of a man who'd learned that rushing never saved anything worth keeping. He carried a kind of quiet authority that made the world seem simpler when he was near. That night, after supper, a thin moon rose over the ridge. Noah had gone to bed early, curled up with his wooden bird. The cabin was still, except for the pop of the fire and the faint sigh of wind outside. Wyatt sat by the hearth, sharpening his knife. His eyes weren't on the blade, though they were far away, looking at something only he could see. The firelight painted his face in copper and shadow. Clara was mending a shirt at the table, needle flashing in rhythm with his knife strokes. She sensed the heaviness in the room, the way a body senses weather coming. Without looking up, she said softly, "You've been quiet all night." Wyatt stopped sharpening, was thinking about what he hesitated, about the panic of '73. Ever hear of it? When the banks failed, he nodded slowly. My father lost everything in it. Folks talk about money when they remember, but what it really took was people. Men drank themselves hollow. Farms went to dust. My wife, Ellen, she tried to keep our girl fed when fever swept through. Town doctor left for the city when folks couldn't pay. By the time I rode back from a job in Kansas, they were both gone. The words came even, without tremor, but they stripped the room bare. Clara set the needle down, throat tight. Wyatt stared into the fire. Every time I hear the wind hit a cabin wall, I remember how quiet that house was after. Felt like the whole world had stopped moving. Guess that's why I keep fixin' things. If I can make something hold together, maybe I won't feel like I failed 'em twice. Clara's heart ached with the weight of what he'd said. She wanted to answer, to offer comfort, but words seemed clumsy beside such loss. So she rose instead, poured the last of the coffee into a tin mug, and set it gently beside him. He looked up. Their eyes met his full of memories he couldn't bury, hers full of understanding she couldn't speak. She sat back down without a word. The fire crackled. Outside, an owl called once and was gone. Wyatt took a slow sip of the coffee. The warmth spread through him, dulling the edges of old pain. When he spoke again, his voice had softened. "Much obliged, ma'am." "For what?" "For listenin', even when I ain't talkin'." Clara smiled faintly. "Sometimes silence tells more truth than speech." He nodded. "That's something Ellen used to say." They both watched the flames for a long time, two souls balanced in the fragile quiet that follows confession. The grief between them wasn't gone, but it had shifted, no longer something to hide from, but something shared. When Wyatt finally rose to bank the fire, Clara whispered, "The roof don't leak no more." He looked at her and gave a tired smile. "Guess the walls are holdin' too." He meant the cabin, but she understood he also meant them. The morning started clear, one of those crisp spring days when the light seems too clean for bad news. The snow had finally melted from the riverbank, leaving behind dark patches of earth that smelled of thaw and promise. Smoke rose steady from the cabin chimney. The world, for once, felt right in its place. Clara Henson was kneading dough at the table, while Noah sat cross-legged near the hearth carving a wooden bird. Wyatt Cole had gone outside to split another stack of logs before the rain that was sure to come by nightfall. His axe rose and fell in its patient rhythm, each swing carving a heartbeat into the quiet. Then came the sound hooves, more than one pair. He stopped mid-swing, the kind of stillness that comes from instinct, not thought. From the ridge above the bend, 3 riders appeared: Sheriff Tom Grady in his brown coat, and 2 townsmen she recognized, even at a distance: Earl Dawson from the livery, and Frank Duffy, the one who always laughed too loud at the saloon. They rode side by side, dust lifting behind them like smoke from a slow-burning fire. Clara stepped out onto the porch, wiping her hands on her apron. The men drew up a few yards from the door. Wyatt set the axe down, leaning it against the stump, and joined her without a word. The sheriff tugged at his reins. "Mornin', Mrs. Henson, Mr. Cole." "Mornin'," Wyatt said, voice even. Grady shifted in the saddle. "We've been hearin' talk down in town. Folks are wonderin' about the arrangement out here." Clara folded her arms, chin high. "Arrangement? About a man livin' with a widow," the sheriff said carefully. "Don't look right to some folks." Wyatt's jaw tightened. "Some folks need better hobbies." Grady gave a small sigh. "You know how people are, Cole. Ain't about what's true, just how it looks. You stay in here permanent long enough to finish repairs," Wyatt said. "Then I'll see." Earl Dawson spat into the dirt. "Seems to me repairs been taking a mighty long time." Clara's eyes flashed. "And seems to me, Mr. Dawson, that's none of your concern." The sheriff's tone hardened a little. "Now, Mrs. Henson, don't take it wrong. You know this town. Reputation's a fragile thing." Something inside her snapped. A thread stretched too tight at last. "Reputation," she said, voice trembling, though not with fear. Where was my reputation when my husband died and I had a boy to feed? Where were these good, godly folks when I asked for work, for credit, for mercy? They shut their doors and called it virtue. This man she turned, pointing at Wyatt, gave what none of you would decency. The sheriff shifted, embarrassed. Now, no one's accusing. Yes, you are, she cut in, her voice rising, clear and fierce. You're accusing me of surviving the only way I can. Wyatt stepped forward then, placing himself between her and the men. He didn't raise his voice, but the calm in it was steel. That's enough. You made your call. Sheriff, you can ride on now. Earl looked ready to argue, but one glance from Grady shut him up. The sheriff cleared his throat, tipping his hat toward Clara. Didn't come for a fight, just had to say my piece. Folks get restless when stories grow too wild. Wyatt's eyes didn't waver. Then maybe folks ought to find better stories. Grady's mouth twitched, half frown, half reluctant respect. You've always had a way with words. Cole, be smart. Keep it peaceful. He tugged at the reins, turning his horse. The other men followed, muttering something under their breath. The sound of hooves faded down the trail until the valley held silence again, wide, cold, and sharp. Clara stood on the porch long after they were gone, her hands still trembling. Wyatt stayed beside her, not touching, not speaking, just there, the kind of presence that steadies, without needing to ask permission. When the riders disappeared beyond the ridge, the fight drained out of her. Her breath hitched once, then again. She pressed a hand to her mouth, but the sobs still escaped a sound too raw for shame. Wyatt reached out slowly, resting a hand on her shoulder. She didn't pull away. Tears came hot and sudden, the kind she hadn't let herself cry for years. Rage, humiliation, and gratitude tangled together until she couldn't tell them apart. I hate them, she whispered. I hate this town. I hate that they can look at me and see filth for what ain't their business. Wyatt's voice was quiet. You don't owe them anything, Clara. She shook her head. I shouldn't care, but I do. You live long enough under other people's eyes. You start thinking through their judgment. He turned her gently so she faced him. Then stop. Look through your own. She tried to meet his gaze, but the intensity there was too much, too kind. You make it sound easy. It ain't, he said, but worth it. They stood like that for a long moment, the wind moving softly through the willows, the smell of damp earth and pine in the air. Somewhere down the creek, a bird called, tentative and thin, like the first note of spring. Later, Wyatt went back to chopping wood, slow and steady. The sound carried through the valley again, a rhythm that said life hadn't stopped. Inside, Clara washed the flour from her hands, wiped her face, and began setting the table for supper. It was something to do, something that made the world right again in small pieces. When Wyatt came in, he hung his coat by the door. His expression hadn't changed, but his eyes softened when he looked at her. You all right? She nodded, though her voice betrayed her. They make me feel dirty. Wyatt, like I've done something shameful. Ain't no shame in decency, he said simply. And I seen plenty of folks in my time, men, who talked loud about righteousness while doing wrong behind closed doors. You ain't one of them. Her hands stilled on the table. And you? What about you? He hesitated. I got my ghosts, but none of them whisper as loud as those men did today. That made her smile. Just a little. You have a way of quieting the noise. Noise don't last long when truth shows up, he said. Outside, the wind picked up again, rattling the shutters like a distant drum, but the walls held steady proof that something built with care could stand against storms, no matter how long they came. Noah appeared from the back room, rubbing his eyes. "They gone." "Mama." She knelt, pulling him close. "They're gone." He looked at Wyatt. "You scared 'em off? Didn't you?" Wyatt chuckled softly. "Nah, son. They just remembered something they forgot, respect." Clara laughed through what was left of her tears, the sound surprising even her. Wyatt smiled at that, a quiet pride flickering across his face. As the three of them sat down to eat, the tension in the room eased. The outside world could talk all it wanted inside. They had warmth, food, and the truth between them. And that, Wyatt thought, was more than most men ever earned. The storm came sudden, like a door slammed by heaven itself. By mid-afternoon, the wind had turned white, swallowing the valley whole. The air howled through the pines and scraped against the cabin walls, like a beast trying to get in. Snow hit the windows sideways, clinging thick and fast. Inside, every beam groaned under its weight. Clara Henson moved quickly, her breath visible even by the firelight. She stuffed rags under the door, checked the shutters twice, and fed the flames until the stove glowed red. Noah huddled under a blanket near the hearth, eyes wide each time the wind roared. Outside, Wyatt Cole was still fighting the cold, hauling the last of the woodpile up to the porch before the drifts buried it for good. His coat was crusted with frost, beard iced white. Every trip took longer, every breath came rougher. Wyatt Clara called through the crack of the door. "That's enough. You'll freeze out there. One more armful," he shouted back, voice half lost in the gale. He kept his promise. But when he stumbled inside, dragging the final load, he looked different. Face gray, movement slow, like someone who'd spent too much of himself against the cold. Clara closed the door behind him and pushed the bolt. "You fool," she whispered, taking the wood from his arms. "No fire's worth that." He managed a weak smile. "Figured you'd want the walls warm." Then his knees buckled. The wood fell with a thud, scattering across the floor. Clara caught him before he hit the stove. Wyatt, his eyes fluttered open, then closed again. His skin burned hot against her hands. By nightfall, the storm was at full fury. The cabin shuddered with each gust, wind slipping through every seam, carrying a low moan that sounded almost human. Clara laid Wyatt on his cot near the fire, covered him with every blanket they owned. His breath came ragged, fever high and climbing. She wrung out a cloth in cool water, pressed it to his forehead. He stirred, mumbling words she couldn't catch. For the first time since he'd come into her life, he looked small, like all the strength that had held him upright had simply gone out. Noah watched from the edge of the bed. "Is he gonna die?" Mama Clara swallowed hard. "No, sweetheart, not while I can help it." She sent the boy to sleep in her bed and returned to Wyatt's side. The fire hissed and snapped. Outside, the wind screamed itself hoarse. She sat through the night, changing the cloth, whispering small prayers she hadn't said since Tom died. Hours passed. Wyatt drifted between dreams and delirium. Once, his hand caught hers and held tight. "Ellen," he murmured, eyes closed. "Don't go yet. Please." The name struck her heart like a stone. His wife the ghost he carried in his silence. Clara felt tears threaten, but blinked them away. She couldn't be jealous of a memory that hurt him so deeply. When he woke again, he was trembling, skin slick with sweat. She helped him drink, then dabbed his forehead once more. "You'll burn yourself out," he rasped. "I've done that before," she said softly. Still here, ain't I? He tried to smile, but the fever pulled it crooked. You shouldn't have to keep me alive. Don't tell me what I should or shouldn't do. Mr. Cole, you've done enough savin' for both of us. Her voice cracked halfway through. She didn't mean it to. She'd learned to hold herself steady in worse storms than this, but something about seeing him so human, so breakable, split her clean down the middle. I can't lose another good man, she whispered. Not to cold, not to fever, not to this cursed life that takes and takes. Wyatt's hand found hers again. His fingers were hot, but the grip was steady. You won't, he murmured. Not this time. She looked down at him, startled by the clarity in his eyes. For a moment, the storm fell away, the sound of it fading until only the fire crackled between them. You hear me? He said, voice rough but sure. Not this time. Clara pressed his hand to her chest, over her heart. Then fight, Wyatt. You fight your way back. The hours bled together. The storm raged on, a white wall outside the windows, sealing them off from the world. Clara worked without rest, feeding the fire, cooling his fever, whispering his name whenever his breath grew too shallow. Sometime before dawn, exhaustion caught her. She dozed in the chair beside his bed, hand still clasped around his. The fire burned low. The wind howled itself out. When she woke, the world was still. Gray light filtered through the frost-coated glass. Wyatt was breathing evenly now, his fever broken. Steam rose from his skin. He opened his eyes slowly, focus returning like sunrise after a long night. You stayed, he whispered. You'd have done the same, she said. He shook his head slightly. You don't know that. I do. They didn't speak for a while after that. The silence between them was different now, warmer, heavier, carrying something unspoken neither dared name. She reached for the cup by the bed and handed it to him. Drink. It's weak broth, but it's hot. He drank, watching her over the rim. You look worn thin. Then we match, she said with a faint smile. He gave a quiet laugh that turned into a cough. She steadied the cup for him until it passed. Later, as the fire built back to life, Clara sat by the window. Outside, the snow had buried the fence posts halfway, but the sky was clear, a rare blue that only comes after storms strong enough to cleanse the air. Wyatt spoke softly from his bed. When I was sick before, after Ellen died, I remember thinking it'd be easier just to stop fighting. Didn't feel like anyone would notice. He paused, eyes on the flames. This time, I knew somebody would. Clara turned to him. Don't say things you don't mean. He met her gaze. Steady now. I don't waste breath on lies. Something in her chest broke open, then not with noise, but with a slow, aching warmth. She wanted to thank him, but gratitude wasn't big enough for what she felt. Instead, she reached across the small space between them, resting her hand lightly on his. Neither of them moved. The firelight flickered over their faces, two people bound not by promise, but by endurance. Outside, the world was still frozen. Inside, a different kind of thaw had begun, that night, when Noah slept and the fire burned low. Wyatt stirred from his cot and whispered, You should rest. Clara shook her head. Can't. Not yet. Storm's done, he said. You can let go now. She looked at him, the corners of her mouth softening. You don't know how long I've been holding on. Wyatt's eyes met hers, full of quiet understanding. Maybe now you don't have to do it alone. The words lingered in the air, tender and true. He drifted back to sleep. and she sat watching him, the man who'd walked into her winter and brought back the warmth she thought she'd buried forever. By the third morning, the storm was gone. The sky stretched wide and clean above Willow Bend, a hard blue that made the snow shine like polished glass. The air carried that sharp sweetness that only comes after the world's been scrubbed raw, every tree branch heavy with ice, every shadow edged in silver. Inside the cabin, the silence felt different now, no longer fear, but calm. Wyatt Cole sat by the fire, pale but steady, wrapped in a blanket that smelled faintly of smoke and pine. Clara Henson poured him coffee, dark and strong, the way he liked it. "You look human again," she said, setting the cup beside him. He smiled crookedly. Guess death changed its mind. Noah grinned from where he sat near the hearth, whittling a stick. "Told you Mom'd fix you up." Wyatt looked at the boy, then at Clara. Seems she fixes more than she knows. Clara busied herself with the stove, but her smile gave her away. For a moment, all three sat in companionable quiet, listening to the logs crackle and the soft drip of snow melting off the eaves. By midday, Wyatt had insisted on stepping outside. The air hit him like a clean knife cold, sharp, honest. He stood a while just breathing it in, hands on his hips, looking out over the valley. The snow stretched endless, broken only by the glint of the half-frozen creek and the black silhouettes of willow trees bending toward it. Clara joined him on the porch, wrapping her shawl tighter. "You shouldn't be out too long," she said. "You're still weak. I've been weak before," he answered softly. "Doesn't sit right with me." They stood side by side, the sun cutting gold through the trees. For the first time, Clara noticed the way he looked at the land like a man measuring something beyond fences or seasons, as though he was trying to decide if this was a place he could root himself. "You're thinking of leavin'," she said quietly. Wyatt didn't look at her, just exhaled slow. "Storm passed, work's near done. Figure that means I ought to move on." Her chest tightened. "You figure wrong." He glanced at her then, brow furrowed. "Why's that?" She met his eyes, unflinching. "Because maybe the good you've been running from ain't somewhere down the road. Maybe it's right here." He didn't answer. The wind rustled through the willows, whispering like an echo of things unsaid. That evening, they ate supper by the fire stew stretched thin, but it filled the cabin with the smell of life. Noah talked about the traps he'd set near the creek, proud of the tracks he'd found. Wyatt listened, nodding in approval, though his mind was elsewhere. When the boy finally went to bed, the quiet that followed carried the weight of unspoken thoughts. Clara watched Wyatt from across the table. His hands were steady now, but she could see restlessness in the way his thumb traced the rim of his cup. "What's pulling at you?" "Wyatt," she asked. He hesitated, then leaned back in his chair, eyes fixed on the fire. "You ever do something you can't take back?" She thought of all the nights she'd prayed for help that never came, all the bitterness she'd carried like a stone in her chest. "Plenty this," she said softly. "But regret don't fix what's done." He nodded slowly. "Years back, I worked for a man named Jonas Pierce, down near Abilene, cattle outfit bigger than some towns. He paid good, but treated his hands worse than dogs. Worked us 16 hours, beat a man near dead for falling asleep on watch. I saw things I should have stopped." He stared into the flames, voice rough. "One winter, I walked away. Left 2 men behind who couldn't. Pierce had them whipped for it. One died the next day. I've been riding ever since trying to find some place where that weight don't follow. Clara's heart ached at the weariness in his tone. You left because you couldn't live with it. That don't make you guilty, don't it? He said, finally looking at her. I walked away instead of fighting him. Maybe if I'd stayed, then you'd be buried beside the man he killed. She interrupted. You can't save the world by dying for it. Wyatt smiled faintly, but there was no humor in it. Maybe not. But I've been wandering since, thinking maybe I ain't earned a roof over me. Clara leaned forward, her voice low and steady. Maybe staying is how you make it right. He blinked, startled. What do you mean? She held his gaze. You fix things. Wyatt, that's what you do. You take what's broken and give it another chance to hold. You did it for this cabin, for me, for Noah. Maybe that's the good. You owe the world not fightin', not runnin', just stayin' and buildin' something that lasts. The fire cracked sharply between them, as if punctuating her words. Wyatt looked away, but not before she saw the flicker of emotion in his eyes, guilt softening into something like hope. You got a way of making a man see straight, he said finally. I just tell what's true, she replied. You're the one who makes it matter. Later that night, he stepped outside again. The moon hung low, pale against the black sky. The snow glowed faintly, a quiet silver world that seemed untouched by cruelty or gossip. From inside the cabin came the muffled sound of Clara humming a tune, the same soft hymn she always sang when she thought no one was listening. Through the window, he could see her silhouette moving gently, tending to the fire, making the home right again. Noah's small wooden bird sat on the windowsill beside her. Wyatt smiled at it, the clumsy shape, the uneven wings. It looked like hope itself trying to take flight. He turned toward the dark stretch of land behind the cabin, the half-frozen creek, the distant hills. His hand rested on the post he'd repaired, feeling the grain of the wood beneath his fingers. It was solid, strong. His work. For the first time in years, he didn't feel like a man passing through. He felt like part of something quiet, honest, and Clara's voice reached him from the doorway. You thinking of leaving again? He shook his head slowly. Not tonight. She smiled faintly, stepping beside him. The wind was cold, but the air between them was warm. Maybe tomorrow, she teased gently. He looked at her, then toward the sleeping valley. Maybe tomorrow looks better from here. She laughed, soft and tired. Then maybe you'll see what I see. What's that? He asked. A man who finally stopped running. Wyatt didn't answer, just looked at her a long moment. Then his eyes shifted toward the cabin. Toward Noah's sleeping form, inside. Toward the roof he'd rebuilt. The shelves he'd carved. The small life he'd helped hold together. The wind rustled through the willows, and he thought maybe belonging wasn't about blood or land. Maybe it was about who'd still stand beside you when the storm cleared. He reached for the door, holding it open for her. The warmth spilled out, washing over both of them. Clara stepped in first. Wyatt followed, behind them. The valley glimmered in moonlight, quiet, endless, and alive with the sound of what stays after the storm. The morning they came, the air had that stillness that always comes before trouble. No birdsong, no wind, just the sound of boots crunching old snow on the road to Willow Bend. Wyatt Cole was mending the wagon wheel by the shed, sleeves rolled, hands black with grease. He heard them before he saw them hooves, slow and deliberate, the rhythm of men who'd already made up their minds. When he looked up, 3 riders were cresting the rise. Samuel Miller in his heavy coat, Earl Dawson beside him, and Sheriff Tom Grady riding just behind, his badge dulled by the morning light. They stopped 20 yards from the cabin, horses snorting clouds into the cold air. Wyatt straightened, wiping his hands on a rag. "Sheriff," he said, calm as still water. "Miller, Dawson, morning to you." Miller's eyes narrowed. "Ain't here for pleasantries. Cole, we told you before, Dust River don't take kindly to drifters playing husband at widows' doors." Wyatt's jaw tightened, but he kept his voice even. "Ain't playing at anything, just helping folks that needed it." Earl Dawson spat into the dirt. "Helps what you call it. Town says different." From the porch, Clara Henson stepped out, shawl drawn tight, face pale but steady. "Town says plenty when it don't know a thing worth listening to." Miller turned toward her, lip curling. "You best hush. Mrs. Henson, some of us are trying to keep your good name from sinking altogether." Clara's hands clenched around her shawl. "My good name? You mean the one you trampled when I begged for credit? When you laughed at me for asking?" Miller's face reddened, but Wyatt stepped between them. "Enough." His voice carried a quiet weight that made even Dawson flinch. "You came to talk, so talk to me. Leave the lady be." Sheriff Grady cleared his throat. "Ain't personal. Cole, folks just uneasy. Rumors startin' fights in town. I'm asking you civil ride on. Keep peace." Wyatt looked at him a long moment. "Peace for who? The ones who spread the lies, or the ones trying to live honest?" The sheriff's jaw worked. But he had no answer. Miller nudged his horse forward. "You think you can stand here and shame this town into liking you? You ain't one of us. Cole. Never will be." Wyatt stepped closer until only a yard of cold air stood between them. "I ain't looking to be one of you, just looking to be decent." Dawson snorted. "Decent don't mean shacking up with a widow." Before Wyatt could answer, Miller swung down from his horse, boots thudding into the snow. "You got two choices. Cowboy, saddle up and ride out, or we drag you to the edge of town ourselves." Wyatt didn't move. "If that's how it's gonna be, you better bring more men." Miller took a step forward, hand twitching toward the revolver at his belt. "You think I won't?" And that's when the sound split the air, a sharp, metallic click, clean and unmistakable. Every head turned. Clara stood on the porch, her father's old rifle braced against her shoulder. The barrel gleamed dull silver in the pale light, aimed steady at Miller's chest. Her voice didn't shake. "You'll take one more step toward him, and I'll show you just how much a woman can mean what she says." Miller froze. "You wouldn't." She took another pace forward, boots crunching the snow. "Don't try me. You call yourselves men of God, but God don't live in your kind of mercy." The silence that followed was thick enough to choke on. Wind brushed through the willows, the only thing daring to move. Wyatt looked at her, really looked, and saw something in her face he'd never seen before. Not fear, not anger, but the calm of a soul that had nothing left to lose. Sheriff Grady shifted in his saddle. "Mrs. Henson," he said quietly, "put the rifle down. No one's here to spill blood." Clara didn't lower it. "Then tell your men to stop looking for someone else's to spill." The sheriff hesitated. Miller's hand twitched again. Wyatt took a step forward, voice low and final. "You heard her? Ride home." Miller's face twisted, but something in Wyatt's tone, steel without fire, made him think better of reaching for his gun. He spat once into the snow, turned on his heel, and climbed back into the saddle. "This ain't over," he muttered. Wyatt's reply came quiet but deadly certain. "It is, if you want to keep your pride in one piece." For a long second, no one moved. Then Sheriff Grady exhaled, slow, the way a man does when he knows he's carrying the wrong side of the law. He looked at Clara, then Wyatt. Miller's a fool, but he ain't the only one in town thinking that way. I can't change what folks say, but I can stop what they do. Wyatt nodded. That's all a man can ask. Grady tipped his hat to Clara, shame softening his voice. Ma'am, I'm sorry for the way this town treated you. Clara lowered the rifle, but her eyes stayed hard. Sorry's a poor plaster for rot that deep, Sheriff. He nodded once, no defense left to give, and turned his horse. The three men rode off the way they'd come, their shapes growing smaller against the snow until they vanished behind the ridge. Wyatt stood for a while in the cold, listening to the wind carry them away. When he turned, Clara was still on the porch, rifle at her side, chest rising and falling with the aftermath of adrenaline. He walked up slowly. You all right? She gave a breathless laugh. You tell me. I just pointed a gun at half the town. Wyatt smiled faintly. You did what you had to. Sometimes that's the only kind of justice left. Her shoulders sagged then, the weight of it catching up. I didn't even think, just saw them threatening you. And he reached out, steadying her arm. You thought just fine. For a moment, they stood close enough to feel each other's breath. Her eyes glistened. Not with tears, exactly, but with everything she couldn't say. Allowed fear, defiance, gratitude, love that hadn't dared to name itself yet. Wyatt broke the silence. You ever fired that thing before? She smiled through a shaky exhale. Never had to. Guess that's changin'. He chuckled softly. Well, you sure looked like you meant it. I did, she whispered, and he believed her, inside. Noah peeked out from behind the curtain, wide-eyed. Mama, you scared him off. Clara ruffled his hair. Something like that? Sweetheart. Wyatt crouched beside the boy. Sometimes scaring a man straight's better than shooting him. Noah grinned. You both make a good team. Wyatt looked up at Clara, meeting her eyes. Yeah, he said quietly. We do. Outside. The snow had begun to melt in slow rivulets down the porch steps. The air smelled of thaw earth, smoke, and something cleaner than either of them could name. For the first time in a long while, Dust River had been forced to look itself in the mirror. And for the first time, Wyatt didn't feel like a man on borrowed ground. He felt like he'd earned his place. Spring came slow but sure to Willowbend, the kind of spring that doesn't announce itself with color or song, but with small, certain changes. The creek ran faster, clear enough to see the stones again. The wind lost its bite, carrying the smell of damp earth instead of frost. And in the mornings, when the light touched the hills, it stayed soft and golden, like it had finally decided to forgive the land. The cabin, once battered and hollow, now stood proud against the greening valley. The roof no longer leaked, the door no longer moaned on its hinges. Rows of young beans sprouted behind the house, their green tips breaking through the thawing soil. Two hens strutted near the fence, scratching at the ground, clucking with the confidence of creatures that knew they were home. Clara Henson stood by the porch rail, hands on her hips, watching Wyatt Cole turn the garden bed with a shovel. His movements were steady, practiced, the rhythm of a man who worked because work meant belonging. Noah trailed close behind him, dropping seeds one by one into the furrows and covering them with dirt, humming off key the way children do when they're happy. That's too close, Wyatt said, glancing down. No, it ain't, Noah argued, proud of his row. Wyatt smiled. You'll see when they crowd each other out. Then I'll just move 'em, the boy said, defiant but grinning. Clara laughed softly. You sound just like him, she called. Wyatt leaned on the shovel, sweat shining at his temples. Then maybe the boy's learnin' something right. Or stubborn. Clara teased. He wiped his brow. Ain't much difference, some days. The three of them laughed together, the sound mingling with the rush of the creek and the rustle of willow leaves overhead. By midday, the work was done. Wyatt stacked the tools near the shed. Noah went to gather eggs. And Clara set water to boil on the stove. The smell of stew began to fill the cabin, rich and savory, the way home should smell. She sliced bread, still warm from the morning bake, brushed it with butter, and set the table 3 tin plates, 3 cups, and a small jar of wildflowers Noah had brought in from the creek bank. Their yellow heads nodded in the faint breeze that slipped through the window. Wyatt came in, shirt sleeves rolled, boots muddy. He paused at the door, looking around like a man still half surprised that this place was real, that it hadn't disappeared, like so many other things in his life. Dinner's ready, Clara said. If you can still move your arms after all that shoveling. I'll manage, he replied, easing into his chair. Noah bounded in after him, holding up 2 eggs with both hands. Look, Mama, the hens finally earned their keep. Then we'll have biscuits tomorrow, she said, smiling. They bowed their heads, for grace short. Simple words, said more in gratitude than habit. Then they ate. The stew was hearty, the bread soft, the coffee strong enough to make a man remember he was alive. Wyatt ate slow, quiet as always, his eyes drifting from the food to the faces around the table. He watched Noah laughing, talking about the tracks he'd found near the fence. He watched Clara brush a stray curl from her face, the light catching on her hair. He felt something warm stir in him, not hunger, not desire, but peace, the kind that doesn't come easy and doesn't come twice. You think the garden'll take? Clara asked after a while. Wyatt nodded. So long as you keep talking to it the way you do me, it won't dare quit. She laughed. I'll take that as a compliment. It was, he said softly. The silence that followed was comfortable, the kind filled not with things unsaid, but with things understood. Outside, the sky was stretching into evening, the sun laying down over the hills. A hawk circled high above the meadow. The air smelled of tilled earth and wood smoke. Inside the cabin, time moved slower, as if the world had decided they'd earned a little rest. Later, after the dishes were washed and Noah had gone to bed, Clara and Wyatt sat on the porch steps. The stars were bright, the river whispering low beyond the trees. Wyatt leaned back against the post, arms resting loosely on his knees. Never thought I'd see this place green, he said. Clara looked at him. You never thought you'd stay long enough to find out? He gave a small, rueful smile. You're right, but some things are worth staying for. Like a garden, she teased. He glanced at her, eyes gentle, like what grows around it. The words lingered between them. She didn't need to answer. The night already had. Inside. Noah stirred in his sleep. The carved wooden bird clutched in his hand. The fire in the hearth burned low but steady, shadows dancing across the walls Wyatt had mended with his own hands. The shelves he'd built held jars of beans, flour, and hope, modest, ordinary, but enough. The table stood ready for morning. The same table that once saw hunger and shame now held abundance and peace. Clara looked around the small home and felt something she hadn't known since before the war. before Tom's death, before the years of begging and being ignored. She felt safe. Wyatt rose from the porch and stepped inside. He poured the last of the coffee, leaned against the doorframe, and looked toward the sleeping boy, then at Clara. "You've built yourself a good life here," he said quietly. "We built it," she corrected. He smiled, that slow, rare kind of smile that comes from deep contentment. "Guess we did." The wind moved through the willows again, gentle and sure. The land breathed in rhythm with the river, with the fire, with the hearts inside that little cabin. For the first time in a long time, nothing needed fixing. Clara set the kettle down, then reached for her cup. "Coffee?" she asked. Wyatt nodded. "Always." She poured for him, then herself. They sat at the table, the one he'd mended, the one that now held not just food, but belonging. Noah's laughter still seemed to echo faintly through the room, lingering like the scent of bread. Wyatt took a sip, looked around, and let out a long, quiet breath. "Feels good to have a place to come home to," he said. Clara met his gaze, eyes soft with knowing. "You already are home, Wyatt." He didn't answer, but the small, grateful nod he gave said more than words ever could. Outside, the last of the snow melted into the soil, feeding the roots below. The willows swayed in the twilight, whispering like old souls at peace. The river carried its song toward Dust River and beyond, indifferent to rumor, unchanged by time. And over it all, the narrator's voice came gentle, as the wind itself. Some kindnesses don't fade with time. They settle deep, like roots under thawing ground. In the quiet heart of this story lies a truth older than the West itself. Kindness is the bravest thing a person can choose. Clara Henson's fight for dignity and Wyatt Cole's quiet redemption remind us that mercy isn't weakness. It's strength worn soft. In a world that often confuses judgment for righteousness, they showed that compassion builds where cruelty only breaks. When life hardens us through loss, shame, or the whispers of others, it's easy to turn cold. But like the thaw that followed their long winter, goodness returns when we dare to trust again, when we let someone in or offer a hand without asking what we'll get in return. The fences of pride, fear, and gossip still stand in our time, only their shapes have changed. Yet the cure remains the same: to help quietly, to forgive freely, and to stand firm for what's decent even when it costs us peace. Because some kindnesses, like roots under thawing ground, don't fade, they grow unseen, holding lives and hearts steady against every storm. Thank you for riding with us through this story, for listening, feeling, and remembering a time when courage was quiet and kindness rode on horseback. If Clara and Wyatt's journey touched something in your heart, a memory, a lesson, or a bit of hope you'd forgotten, we'd be honored if you'd share it forward. Like this story, if it warmed your soul, share it so another wanderer might find a little light in their storm. And subscribe to Wild West Echoes, where every tale keeps the fire of the old frontier alive. Until next time, friends, keep your coffee hot, your spirit kind, and your trail true.